Welcome to the McKnight Center, and thank you for joining us on Center Stage. During this series, we invite you to learn alongside us as we take a closer look at the performing arts, guest artists, and so much more. We encourage you to keep on learning and to create your own fun at home. Joining us today, we have OSU's Director of Dance, Emma Draves, and Director of Musical Theater, Devon Hunt. We will be discussing more with them about their upcoming production, Theory of Relativity. But first, let's join the ensemble members as they take center stage and perform Relativity. I'm here with the new Director of Dance, Emma Draves, and new Director of Musical Theater, Devon Hunt, here at OSU, and they're going to talk with me more about the upcoming production, Theory of Relativity. Now, I have to be honest, I had never heard of that production until this had come about within the last month, got on my radar, but of course, like many, we think Theory of Relativity, we think Einstein's famous theorem. Is there really a strong connection? How does that reference fit into your production?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I hadn't heard of this show until I started looking for a show to fill this season. And that title is what first caught my attention because I have a background in the sciences. And so I was immediately intrigued. This is not something you usually see in theater. And so I began listening to it, and I was immediately struck by just some really fantastic music. But what the writers of this show have done is they've taken scientific concepts like Einstein's theory of relativity, Newton's laws of motion, various other scientific principles, and kind of looked at human connection through this lens of bodies in motion and forces applied to things. So it's really quite an interesting blend of scientific concepts, but also just an exploration of human connection.
Okay, so I was lucky enough to come to one of your rehearsals earlier this week, and I like how you said human connection, because a lot of what I took away was maybe the human experience. And from my research, it looks like a very stripped down production. So instead of maybe all the bells and whistles that we think of sets and props in some musical theater productions, what are maybe some of the challenges that you had to undertake in such a stripped down production as Theory of Relativity?
Yeah, so this show actually lends itself really well to not needing a large production. It's really almost more of a song cycle than it is the kind of typical book musical as we think of it, right? Where we're introduced to characters and something happens to them, there's this kind of linear progression of a plot. Instead, this is a collection of people who share their experiences and share their stories, and through the sharing and listening to each other's stories, they find connection. And so it's been kind of a joy for me as somebody who first started in music to get to really focus on creating a sonically beautiful show, and to not have to worry so much about all of the moving parts of set design and tech and all of that thing. And because we're doing, like you said, a very stripped down show, we can focus on really how do we tell the story through the music. And so that's been a joy for me.
Well, you mentioned moving parts and using, sounds like, the music as a vehicle. So Emma, I want to talk to you briefly about using music as a vehicle, or even just overall your choreographic style. How do you approach choreography, especially in an ensemble piece that we saw earlier as Relativity?
Sure. For this production, and also keeping in mind where we're performing, it's a fairly narrow space, so that was something. And then we have heights to work with, so that was something. So taking those elements, and then of course the music. I actually pulled upon my background in Bharatanatyam, which they have this, it's a South Indian dance form, and there's this element of abhinaya, which is the sort of the expression of the hand and the face. And so I sort of tapped into that from my own history, and we created something that is not quite abhinaya, but it's inspired by, in terms of creating gestures that could be repeated. So you'll see kind of person A and person B, and it's quite simple, but because we sort of codified the language through the gesture, we can repeat that in the show, and that to give a sense of continuity, and again, the sense sort of the sense of the cast coming together as the show progresses. And then of course for the piece you saw, the more production, and there's lots of rhythmic and play, and that's the one where we really got to get into deeply connect with the music, with the rhythms, and how to physicalize those rhythms, and then ultimately expressing that sense of emotion, so that we're connecting with the audience in that sort of cyclical nature of theater.
Mm-hmm. You made mention of the unique space, and we are going to be housing this production here at the McKnight Center in our outdoor plaza. So when it comes to staging or any pre-planning that you had to think of for such a small venue, what was some of that process like for you?
It was a lot of, so because this is more of a concert version than a traditional show, that allowed us the flexibility to be able to work in the kind of unusual space that we're working in. In most proscenium theaters, you're used to having a deep theater, you're used to having wings, right, where things can enter and exit. And so it became a really interesting challenge to figure out how to work in such a narrow space. And again, this is another instance where the nature of the show really lent itself to that flexibility, because it's actually directed in the show that the cast stays on stage for the entire time. So I didn't have to worry about entrances and exits, and what do I do without wings, and what do I do without, escape routes, etc. And so a lot of things that really just came together fortuitously to allow us the flexibility to work in an unusual and exciting space like an outdoor venue with a very long and very narrow stage.
Yeah. Emma, you made mention earlier that in your choreography choices you created physicality that maybe would repeat itself throughout, but I want to hear from both of you, what is maybe something you would encourage your audience to look or to listen for as they come to witness Theory of Relativity?
Well, Devon had was just talking about how the students have really come into their characters. So we've been working with that quite a bit, sort of shaping the body to be a part of the character. So what I mean is that they might hear a thing and they might see it with their eyes, but it doesn't necessarily perform in that way to the viewer. So we've been working on this added level of, like, if you're listening, you're attuning your body, you're like really turning the shoulders and shaping the torso, or you have this, like, you're like slung back and you're clearly not paying any attention because you could care less what's happening, right? So I think that's been kind of fun to look into those subtleties. And then I said I guess one specific moment is at the end of this Me and Ricky song, there's a trio in the back, and then the soloist has this open moment, this sort of cliffhanger moment. And we talked about them going from kind of being the sort of Supremes-esque backup singers and performing, and then transitioning just for a moment to almost be the viewer and to try and reflect what the audiences might have felt in the moment before they then get back into the performance aspect. And it's one of those moments that I don't know if audiences will really see that, but my hope is that they feel it, right? So you have that just continual exchange of bringing the viewer into the show and not just kind of like entertained by, but really, this.
Integrated.
Really
Integrated into the
That's
performance.
a great word, yeah, really inside of the experience.
Very cool. Devon, would you say anything specifically you would want your audience to look or listen for?
Yeah, so a big kind of overarching theme for me, as I was inspired by the connection to science, and there's also a lot of space type connection here, I was really struck by the idea of constellations, right? When ancient civilizations looked up into the sky, they connected these stars they drew lines between these stars and, created images, right? And created stories around these images. And of course, now we know that these stars are hundreds, thousands, millions of light years apart from each other. But from the point of the observer on Earth, they were able to make those connections and to draw a picture out of that. And so I would encourage audiences to keep an eye out for any kind of celestial or starry or constellation-themed imagery and follow it as it sort of winds its way through the show and creates a common thread and a common theme throughout the show.
Very cool. Very interesting. Now, just for fun, since Theory of Relativity came out of left field for me, I would love to hear from each of you maybe a less well-known production, play, musical, dance production that you would encourage our audience to take a look at just to broaden their scope.
Yeah, there's so many. But Akram Khan is a choreographer that's happening right now. And his work really brings together his own sort of Bangladeshi and British background. But he works across the field of Kathak and contemporary dance and ballet. He just a couple years ago created a full-length ballet giselle, and it's stunning work. And you can see bits of it on the internet. And I don't know if they can release the whole thing or they have released the whole thing for copyright. But I just think Akram Khan is someone we could look up. He's stunning work. But in terms of a piece I know you can see in your free time is Alvin Ailey's Revelations. Is accessible right now online. The company's made it accessible for free because we can't always access live performance right now. But in any case, it's truly a masterpiece, this work, and I don't know how you can walk away not feeling more joyful when it's over. So I would suggest Alvin Ailey, Revelations.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got two as well. The first is the musical The Wedding Singer, which may ring a bell for people who are familiar with the movie. Follows a very similar plot, but it's fun and energy and all of the great kind of 80s synth, rock that you could ever wish for. It's just really charming and really lovely. The other one is the show Lucky Stiff by Aarons and Flaherty, who are also known for Ragtime, Once on This Island, Seussical. But it follows this British shoe salesman who inherits $6 million from his uncle. But the terms of him getting that money is he has to take his deceased uncle's body to Monte Carlo, and wheel him around in a wheelchair, and he has to do all of these specific things in order to get the money. And if he doesn't, then there's a dog charity that's going to get the money. And so there's a representative of the dog charity who's like watching him to make sure he does all the things. And then, so it's this really just kind of zany, crazy, fun show. Really fantastic movie and, really fantastic music. And just, it's one of those shows that you go to the theater to escape from the world and kind of just get lifted into another joyful place. And so both of those shows I would highly, highly recommend because they're just so much fun.
Well, it sounds like I have some listening and some viewing to look forward to, so thank you. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come chat with me. Can you remind us one more time when and where our audience can come check out Theory of Relativity?
Absolutely. So we'll be opening right here in the McKnight Center Plaza. The show runs April 22nd through the 25th, and we'll have show times at 7 p.m. each night.
All right. Thank you each so much. And a special thanks to each of you, our viewers, patrons, and advocates. Keep an eye out for our next installment, and until then, keep creating at home.